It was knowledge not meant for you. Something buried so deep, so deliberately erased, that just hearing it begins a transformation you can never undo. In the winter of 1853, a burned letter was discovered hidden behind the hearthstone of an abandoned manor in northern Vermont. What remained of its words were warped, singed, but legible. It spoke of the girl with the mirror eyes, of a boy sealed in the west wing, and of the hollow room beneath the floor where they placed the screaming heads upright, so the sound would not escape. This wasn't fiction. It was signed by Emery Duskbane, final heir to a family no history book dares to name. Before we go further, before we strip back the final veil they've kept draped over this world for centuries, subscribe to Dead Scroll right now. This is not entertainment. This is the end of innocence. Like this video, if you've ever felt something was wrong, but couldn't quite name it, you're about to learn the name and what it costs. The story of the Duskbane family has been officially lost, misfiled, or redacted in over 19 state archives. Their estate was erased from 3 official maps by 1870. Every mention of them in public records ends in contradiction or madness. But the truth is buried in silence, not absence. And tonight, we're going to dig it up, one layer at a time. There was once a child named Judith Duskbane who never blinked, never cried, and whose teachers claimed she could finish their sentences before they even spoke them. There was her brother Elias, who vanished from his bed one night in 1846 only to return 5 days later with dried blood around his mouth and a book sewn into his skin. Not tucked beneath his arm, sewn into him. The Duskbanes did not rule with swords or gold. They ruled by rewriting the way people thought. They operated schools, religious societies, and medical boards. But behind each door was a different kind of control system, a different type of grooming. And what started in Vermont spread, quietly, invisibly, like a root rot through the very soil of America's founding virtue. This isn't just about a family. This is about how innocence is weaponized, how entire communities become blind to their own rituals, and how truth, real truth, is scrubbed clean until it looks just like fiction. You're not watching a story. You're entering a war for your own perception. Keep going. They say Vermont's winters silence everything, but on the Duskbane estate, the snow only amplified the screams. According to private testimony smuggled out in 1871 by a groundskeeper named Thomas Avery, the estate's main house, Grey Marrow Hall, was constructed with walls packed full of sheep's wool and human teeth. When asked why, Avery replied simply, "So the prayers don't echo back." At the center of this horror was Patriarch Alaric Duskbane. By outward appearance, he was a genteel scholar, a benefactor of orphans and headmaster of the prestigious New Eden Institute. But behind closed doors, he led something far darker. The Institute's stone cellars held more than wine and instruments. They held 13 leather chairs bolted to the ground, each facing a mirror. These were not punishment cells. They were initiation chambers. Alaric believed that human morality was a flaw, something bred into people by weak traditions and sentimental gods. The Duskbanes, he said, were chosen not to preserve innocence, but to burn it away, to refine the human soul through terror, obedience, and silence. And so the experiments began. The children brought to New Eden came willingly. Their families were told they'd receive the finest education in the Northeast. And in the beginning they did. The books were real. The science was cutting edge. The uniforms pressed. But around the 3rd week, the curriculum changed. Assignments began to include obedience diaries, eye contact endurance, and mortality visualization drills. One student, Henry Lask, wrote that he was made to watch his own reflection for 9 hours straight. Another, Miriam Dorsey, described a chamber filled with rotating images, animals dying, a mother's face aging rapidly, then her own, over and over again. What was this? It was not education. It was programming. This wasn't a school. It was a controlled environment for psychological dismantling. The Duskbanes weren't teachers. They were refiners of consciousness, breaking down identity, thought, and resistance to rebuild something else. Something cold. Something compliant. These children weren't just being taught. They were being remade, and no one stopped them. No one questioned it, because the Duskbanes had inserted themselves into the very core of institutional power: education, charity, medicine, the church. They wore respectability like armor, and anyone who got too close was buried, either in scandal or in the woods behind the orchard where the soil never quite froze. Keep listening. The next layer will make your skin crawl. There was no thunder the night Elias Duskbane died. No storm, no wind, just silence, and the sound of slow footsteps from the east wing of Graymarrow Hall. The records claim he passed in his sleep, but the truth, preserved in a physician's unsigned journal found inside a hollowed-out hymnal, tells something else entirely. Elias had not spoken a word in 3 months. He had not eaten in 2 weeks. And yet, when they found him, his body was twisted into a position only possible if someone had bent it, after rigor mortis had set in. They buried him quietly, beneath the chapel stairs, in a coffin lined with mirrors. When asked why, Alaric Duskbane responded, to teach him to see what he had become. That phrase would later appear in 15 different notebooks found at New Eden. See what you have become. It was the final stage of what the Duskbanes called the 9 veils, a method of stripping away the human in 9 psychological phases. Each veil represented a layer of delusion: comfort, ego, memory, morality, pain, identity, resistance, autonomy, and finally, truth. But their version of truth was a revelation. It was annihilation. Students who reached the 9th veil were never the same. Some were sent home, mute. Others became staff, obedient, hollow-eyed, robotic. But the most successful were moved to the archive. What was the archive? No one truly knows. It is mentioned only 3 times in scattered fragments. One entry reads, "Eliza walked in yesterday. She did not walk out, but I could still hear her singing from inside the walls." This was not a metaphor. The Duskbanes were perfect predators, hunting the young, the gifted, the forgotten, not with blades, but with doctrine, status, and systems. They manipulated psychology before Freud was even born. They understood trauma as a tool, silence as a language, mirrors as weapons. They didn't just destroy lives, they rewrote them, permanently. And now comes the question you've been avoiding since this began. Why would a family with this much control vanish from the public eye? Why erase every trace? Because the Duskbanes didn't vanish. They evolved. They changed names, changed institutions, and moved quietly into the structures that still govern us today. Education boards, child protective services, religious oversight committees, elite prep schools, mental health facilities. The house was never the prison. The idea was. And once that idea infects a society, it doesn't die. It replicates. You're not safe. Not because you're in danger, but because you've never questioned who taught you to define what danger even is. Keep going. You're almost ready to see what they never wanted you to find. By 1859, no one spoke the Duskbane name aloud in Vermont. It wasn't forbidden by law. It was shunned by memory. A superstition in the skin. Locals called Graymarrow Hall the Hollow House, and children were warned not to follow any music they heard from the forest at night. But every so often, a melody still drifted down the valley. A hymn, slow, off-key, sung by voices that didn't sound quite young. The most chilling record comes from a federal surveyor named Emmett Rowe, tasked with recharting land boundaries after state acquisition. He and his assistant spent a night on the old Duskbane property in early November. The official report was blank, but in Rowe's private journal, never meant for public eyes, he wrote something far more disturbing. "We camped near the West Wing ruins. Around midnight, I heard whispering from under the frost. Beneath our tent, I dug with my hands. I found stone carved with names, then silence and one knock. From beneath the slab, they left before dawn." His assistant never spoke again. Emmett himself died within a year, blind and convinced he was being watched through mirrors. This is what happens when structures of abuse are wrapped in virtue. When we elevate cruelty as discipline. When we confuse obedience with righteousness. The Duskbanes built an entire system designed to break the will, and they perfected it. They masked trauma as teaching, punishment as growth, and possession as protection. But perhaps the most terrifying truth is this. They were protected, not because no one knew, but because those who did chose silence. The head of the Vermont Episcopal Diocese at the time, Bishop Renly Armitage, visited New Eden 7 times. Each visit coincided with the sudden disappearance of a student. In his private correspondence, later seized in a corruption probe, he referred to Grey Marrow not as a school, but as a purification site. His phrase, not mine. What was being purified? Not the soul, not the mind, the conscience. The Duskbane model wasn't about reforming children. It was about erasing doubt, reshaping minds that could later serve as tools, soldiers, shadows, obedient to a system that demanded silence and feared truth. This model didn't end in Vermont. It spread. The programs changed names. The buildings changed ownership. But the methods? They're still in use today, only with better lighting, better branding, and tighter legal shields. Think of every institution you trust, every one you assume exists to protect the vulnerable. Now ask, who trained the protectors? You're starting to feel it now, aren't you? That sick sensation in your gut. It's not fear. It's the sound of your illusions breaking. Keep going. In 1861, an unsigned package arrived at the Boston office of Dr. Lucien Halberd, a prominent psychologist known for pioneering early trauma studies. Inside were 3 items: a child's drawing, a page torn from a Duskbane sermon, and a single human tooth, too small to belong to an adult. The drawing depicted a large house with no windows, surrounded by what appeared to be screaming trees. And in the center, a figure with no face, arms outstretched, standing beneath the phrase, "He watches when we sleep." Dr. Halberd never published what he found, but he did resign from Harvard 3 months later, retreating to a coastal asylum, where he reportedly spent the rest of his life staring at his own reflection. The file labeled Duskbane was later recovered from his estate. Most of it was burned, but one fragment survived. It reads, "They don't use locks. They use belief." This is the center of it all, the genius of the Duskbane method. There were no chains, no visible prisons, just rules, rituals, and the constant threat of spiritual damnation. The children weren't guarded by walls. They were caged by conviction. Punishment came not as violence, but as withdrawal, silence, disappearance. A student would be there one day, gone the next. No explanation, no goodbyes. Just the empty bed and the slow understanding that to speak out was to vanish. New Eden operated under a twisted theology. Pain was purification. Obedience was elevation. And joy was vanity, something to be scoured out through shame and solitude. The teachers smiled rarely, and when they did, it was only in the presence of suffering. What they instilled wasn't education. It was submission. To the Duskbanes, identity was a disease. Individuality was rot. The goal was assimilation into the design, a belief that some bloodlines were chosen to lead and others born to obey. But who decided? That's where it becomes dangerous. Because even now, remnants of the design still exist. In how some institutions demand silence from victims, how whistleblowers are buried in red tape, how elite families protect their own behind closed doors. The same rot, the same system, modern, polished, but unmistakable. And the ones who still follow it, they don't wear black robes anymore. They wear suits. They run boards. They pass laws. You've heard their names. You voted for their schools. You've paid into their systems. And you never once asked where those philosophies came from. Grey Marrow was never destroyed. It was franchised. Grey Marrow Hall's architectural blueprints, recovered in 1923 from a condemned courthouse basement, revealed something chilling. The school had 3 known floors, but the schematics showed 5. 2 were subterranean. And worse, only the Duskbane family had keys to those levels. Officially, they were labeled as storage and sanctum. But in the margin of the original hand-drawn design, a phrase was etched into the vellum in faint graphite. Silence belongs below. Witnesses over the years, few as they are, have tried to describe what happened in those lower chambers. Some say children were taken there during long fasts or when they sinned in dream. Others claim that entire lessons were held in those depths, where candles lined the walls and the air turned copper sweet. The most disturbing account came from a young groundskeeper named Fletcher Kane, who worked at Grey Marrow for less than 2 months in 1857. He fled the estate in the middle of the night and was found 2 days later, shoeless, covered in mud, muttering a phrase again and again. They sang without mouths. They sang without mouths. The Duskbane family never responded to the allegations. In fact, they never spoke to any authority figure at all. They didn't need to. Their reach extended far beyond Vermont, into church hierarchy, into medical boards, even into early American education councils. They funded psychiatric studies, wrote anonymous treatises on moral discipline, and ghost-authored dozens of public school prayer books, all of which carried a buried imprint of their ideology. And those 2 underground levels? They were never excavated. The area was later classified as structurally unsafe and sealed in 1904 after 3 inspectors died under unexplained circumstances. One drowned inside the building. Another was found crushed between 2 walls. No sign of collapse. The third? His report simply ended mid-sentence. There is something breathing behind the brick. We have to ask, what were they preserving beneath Grey Marrow? What idea, what relic, what doctrine was so sacred that it had to be buried alive with the bones of its victims? This isn't just about horror. It's about architecture of control. How entire belief systems are built into walls, into routines, into educational frameworks. How trauma becomes tradition, and how silence becomes sacred. If you're still here, I want you to prove it. Comment the phrase, "Silence belongs below," in the section below. Type it twice. Once for the story, once for the truth it reflects. Embrace yourself. We haven't even touched the basement yet. The basement of Grey Marrow Hall was not built with stone. Not entirely. Beneath the structural foundation lay a lattice of oak and iron, older than the estate itself. When archaeologists briefly entered it during a failed restoration effort in 1946, they found a single corridor, 12 feet wide, completely circular, with grooves carved into the walls like runes or veins. At the end of that corridor stood what they initially mistook for a furnace. It was not a furnace. It was a cage, 7 feet high, hexagonal, lined with what appeared to be sharpened ivory and fragments of mirror glass. Inside it, they found the remnants of cloth robes, bone fragments belonging to children no older than 10, and something far worse, pages sewn together with sinew. Pages not written in ink, but in charred ash and dried blood. A language only one man claimed to understand. He translated a single sentence before going silent for life. Do not wake the second one. That phrase has appeared 6 more times in American psychiatric institutions between 1890 and 1933. Always from different patients. Always from individuals with no known connection to each other. Yet each spoke the same words when asked why they refused to sleep. The second one is watching. I heard it in the basement. Whatever the Duskbanes had bound beneath Grey Marrow, it wasn't human. Not entirely. Some described it as a thought that could possess people. Others, as a sound that only certain children could hear. The family's secret texts, retrieved decades later by defected cult archivists, refer to the second one as a preserved will, something older than death, not alive but conscious. This wasn't just about obedience. This was about ritual containment. And here's where it gets worse. The rituals did not end with the Duskbanes. In 1971, a Vermont sanitarium was shut down after a mass patient suicide. The building had been constructed directly atop what used to be the eastern wing of Grey Marrow Hall. In the reports, one doctor recorded hearing chanting through the air vents, though no source was ever found. His final journal entry: they're still feeding it. They never stopped. We are not chasing ghosts. We're confronting a legacy, a system that still operates under new names, in new places, with the same purpose. Keep the second one asleep. But what if someone already woke it? In 1985, A team of underground utility workers outside Hollow Pines, Vermont, reported a discovery that was quietly removed from public record. While digging a new pipeline just miles from where Grey Marrow once stood, they struck an unexpected chamber, brick-lined, dry despite the groundwater, and sealed with a strange iron crest, an inverted tree, its roots reaching skyward. This symbol had only been seen once before, etched into the original Duskbane family gravestone, long since vandalized and buried by local authorities. Inside the chamber was a single wooden chair. On it sat a wax figure. At least, that's what they thought it was. But autopsy reports later revealed something horrifying. It was not wax at all, but human skin, carefully preserved, stretched, and molded into the shape of a man. No organs, no eyes, no mouth, just a folded slip of parchment placed where the tongue should have been. It read, "He remembers the sound." That's the part no one talks about, the sound. Survivors from Grey Marrow, many of them children who were later institutionalized, spoke of the hollow hymn, a low, humming chant that would begin under their beds or behind the walls at night. It didn't follow melody. It followed pulse. They said it made the air taste like rust and the mirrors ripple. And worse, it only ever started after someone went missing. This was never a story about one cursed building. It was about a frequency, a vibration passed through ritual, language, and belief, something seeded into generations. One victim, 17-year-old Marion Clark, wrote in her journal before her disappearance, "If you hear it once, it will always know where you are." And maybe that's why the Duskbanes were so obsessed with silence. Not as discipline, but as protection. Talking about the second one, or even thinking about the sound, was believed to draw its attention. That's why those who escaped the estate rarely lived long after they spoke out. They weren't silenced by conspirators. They were located by it. And here's where you come in. If you've listened this far, your mind has already absorbed the rhythm. The question is, will you survive it? Because the next section contains a forbidden piece of that hymn, reconstructed from journals, interviews, and smuggled documents. Listen carefully, but do not repeat it out loud. The hymn has no title, at least, not in any known language. But its reconstructed form, pieced together from lost diaries, corrupted wax cylinders, and a banned 1878 sermon transcript, follows a terrifying structure, repeating tones, shifting syllables, and unnatural silences. Scholars of occult phonetics refer to it as a phonetic virus, a sound that doesn't just enter the ears, but inhabits the listener. Here is what was recovered. Ishkanor, Velderin, Sulath, Thrin Mor El-Kav. The meaning? No one agrees. But in one chilling interpretation, the translation reads, "You are not alone. He is beneath your breath. He waits inside the hush." When this chant was played in controlled experiments during the 1960s by a secretive academic circle at Briarhelm University, 3 participants suffered full psychotic breaks. One gouged out his ears. Another attempted to dig into the wall of the soundproof testing room, claiming she could see something watching her through the pattern. The third disappeared entirely the following night. His window was locked from the inside, but in his bed lay a note. He remembered the sound. The same phrase keeps coming up. Across eras, across places, across victims. And it confirms a terrifying theory. The second one isn't a spirit. It's an echo, a thinking echo. And Grey Marrow Hall wasn't just a school. It was a tuning fork, a place constructed with deliberate acoustics, sacred geometry, and psychological conditioning, all designed to amplify the hymn, to resonate it across the bodies and minds of those within. You have to ask, what kind of entity needs song to move, to think, to feed? And worse, is it still singing now? Because here's the chilling part. One of the Grey Marrow survivors, who hadn't spoken in over 30 years, broke his silence in 2002 after hearing a phone ringtone in a hospital waiting room. He stood, stared into the void, and said, "That's the first line. This story isn't about the past. It's about what's coming back." So here's your final warning for tonight's descent. Turn the volume down if you dare. But remember, once you've heard even a whisper, silence won't save you anymore. The youngest Duskbane child, Elsabeth, was just 9 when the last known Grey Marrow ritual was performed in 1873. She was different from the others, paler, thinner, and prone to long periods of silence where her eyes would remain fixed on nothing. Servants said she would sleepwalk through the halls, sometimes humming a strange tune under her breath. A melody no one could place, but one that always made the candles flicker. One night, she walked straight into the chapel and carved something into the wooden floor with a dinner knife. The symbol was a perfect spiral, surrounded by 6 dots. Below it, in a handwriting far too elegant for a child, she wrote, "He hears better through children." That phrase caused the family to panic. Elsabeth was removed from the estate, sent to a sanatorium in Germany. But here's what they didn't tell the public. She was never seen again. Officially, she died of fever, but her body was never returned. Her room was sealed. In Greymarrow Hall, which once echoed with the whispers of dozens of children, was abruptly emptied and condemned. What did Elsabeth hear? Years later, in 1935, a man named Dr. Julius Harrow, a psychiatrist obsessed with the Duskbanes, published an anonymous paper under a pseudonym. In it, he described what he believed was the true purpose of the estate. Greymarrow was a gateway for a listener. The second one cannot manifest unless it is echoed in the thoughts of a child. The spiral is its ear, the hymn its breath, and silence is the only thing it cannot follow. The spiral symbol has since appeared in several places, on the wall of a demolished orphanage in Romania, carved into a pew in an abandoned Massachusetts church, even found scrawled in chalk in the room of a nonverbal boy in Arkansas who had never left his home. All drew it the same way. And now, a question must be asked. Are these children dreaming the same dream? Are they hearing the same sound? And if so, is that him still spreading? Halfway through this descent, we ask you, comment below with the phrase, "He hears through the hush." Let us know you're still with us and that he hasn't found you yet. Then say it again, silently, to yourself. He hears through the hush. Now breathe and keep going. You're deeper than most have ever gone. In 1949, the estate grounds were sold to a private religious group known only as the Vale of 12. Officially, they were listed as a retreat society focusing on meditation and spiritual silence. But surviving photographs tell a different story. Rows of identical figures in heavy black garments, standing barefoot in snow. No faces visible. No voices recorded. Just stillness. And behind them, the crumbling bones of Greymarrow Hall, still untouched, still watching. But it was what they built beneath the manor that caused alarm. Blueprints obtained through a whistleblower show that the Vale of 12 constructed a massive underground chamber. Octagonal, lined with stone shaped not by tools, but by heat. Some geologists called it impossibly smooth. In the center, a raised dais etched with the spiral symbol. And suspended above it, by unseen means, was a rusted iron bell. No clapper, no hammer, yet visitors reported hearing it ring. Only once, always from distance, always followed by a migraine. Some described a strange sensation afterward, as if time had slipped or someone else had briefly taken control of their thoughts. One member of the Vale, Brother Kelram, disappeared for 6 days during the construction. When he returned, he couldn't speak. His tongue had been removed, but not by force. It was surgically extracted, precisely, carefully, without blood. He wrote only one sentence before he died. He doesn't want our voice. He wants our silence. And this is the paradox that haunted the Vale of 12 until their final ritual in 1954. To summon the second one, they didn't chant. They didn't scream. They stood perfectly still, perfectly silent, for 12 days straight. No food, no sleep, no sound. When authorities finally raided the estate due to concerned relatives, they found all 12 members in the chamber, seated in a circle, eyes wide open, and not one of them was breathing. There were no signs of struggle, no sign of poison, just that same iron bell, vibrating softly, as if moved by breath that came from nowhere. And carved into the wall behind them, scratched by hand. The second one has listened. He is no longer waiting. Now tell me, how do you silence something that was born in silence? And more importantly, what happens when it starts to speak? The incident was buried, of course. Reports redacted. Journalists warned. The property quietly absorbed by a pharmaceutical subsidiary with ties to acoustic neuroscience. But two investigators who were part of the 1954 raid, Special Agent Morgan Albrecht and field historian Dana Vell, did not forget. For the next 20 years, they attempted to trace similar phenomena across the world. They started noticing a pattern. Wherever the spiral appeared, people vanished. Not violently, not messily, but as if they had been peeled from time, vanishing into quiet. The only trace they left behind was often a low-frequency hum in the walls, a humming that couldn't be recorded, only felt like a pressure behind the eyes or inside the teeth. And then in 1972, the case went further than either of them expected. In a psychiatric facility in Belgium, a 14-year-old girl named Irina painted the same spiral on her bedroom ceiling using her own hair and soot. She had never heard of Grey Marrow, never left the facility. When questioned, she claimed, "He told me, in my sleep." He was underneath the hospital. Albrecht and Vell were flown in. They brought with them a soundproof mobile lab, equipped with directional microphones, infrasound sensors, and EEG monitors. They wanted proof. But what they got was something no device could explain. On the fourth night, just after 3:13 a.m., every piece of equipment shut down simultaneously. Not powered off, ceased functioning entirely, as if the components had forgotten their purpose. When the backup recorders were played, only one word was captured. A whisper. Near. That same night, Irina disappeared from a locked room. Security footage showed nothing. But in the middle of her empty bed, carved into the mattress coil, was a phrase. Echoes do not need doors. Albrecht was never the same after that. In his final letter, before going missing in 1975, he wrote, "The second one is not a creature. He's a principle, a shape, a hum that learns. And now, he remembers being heard. So now ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone in silence? When you sat in a room, no sounds, no lights, and yet still felt something with you. Something behind your breath. Maybe it's already listening." In the winter of 1976, Dana Vell, the last surviving Grey Marrow investigator, moved to a remote cabin in northern Scotland. She told no one except a single trusted academic, Professor Leland Croft, who specialized in neuroacoustics and the phenomenon of shared auditory hallucination. Her final message to him was written on the back of a torn map, and it contained just one sentence. The spiral is no longer drawn. It's forming on its own. When Croft arrived weeks later to check on her, he found her cabin empty. No signs of a break-in. No blood. No personal belongings disturbed. But in the center of the living room floor was a rug. Heavy. Faded. When he pulled it back, he found something burned into the wooden floorboards. A perfect double spiral. One curling clockwise, the other counterclockwise, forming an eye. Underneath that, carved so deeply it broke the blade, the second one now sees. Croft was shaken, not just by the markings, but by the behavior of the local wildlife. No birds sang within a mile of the cabin. Insects avoided the walls. He swore he saw condensation on the mirrors form in circular patterns, as though something were breathing against the glass from the other side. He stayed for only one night, and in the silence of that remote place, just before sleep, he heard it, not in his ears, but in the bones of his skull. A deep vibration, not a word, not music, but meaning, an invitation. He left before dawn. Back in Edinburgh, Croft spent the next 12 years documenting what he called the frequencies of cognition, specific low-range sounds that, when combined with silence, could induce altered mental states. He became convinced that the spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a sound wave, a visual language of resonance, a call that only the human subconscious could decode. His unpublished manuscript, Echo Threshold, was seized by government officials in 1988 under claims of public safety. He was later institutionalized after attempting to remove his own eardrums with a brass tuning fork. His last coherent statement: "If you listen to silence long enough, it starts listening back." So were we really hearing when there's nothing left to hear? Were we inviting when we sit quietly, eyes closed, heartbeat slowing, and feel that hum press against our minds? By the early 1990s, Graymarrow Manor had become an urban legend, a whispered dare among teenagers, a curiosity for paranormal forums, a footnote in classified archives. But the silence didn't stop. It spread. In 1991, an entire research outpost in Siberia went dark for 13 days. When a satellite flyover finally forced a ground check, the team that entered found no bodies, just equipment still running, coffee still warm, and on one of the whiteboards, scrawled in red marker. We tried not to hear it. 2 months later, in Brazil, 27 people attending a sound therapy retreat were found seated in meditation circles in complete silence. Not one of them was dead. Not yet. But all were completely catatonic, eyes wide open, unblinking. The only sound picked up by emergency responders' radios was a barely audible loop. A heartbeat. Slowing. Sinking. With theirs. Then came the recordings. Throughout the 1990s, dozens of independent musicians and sound engineers began reporting strange anomalies in audio software. When recording silence, total ambient void, unexplainable harmonics began appearing. Not feedback, not background noise. Patterns, always centered around the frequency of 63.2 hertz, modulating at precise mathematical intervals, almost as if responding to human attention. Some theorized it was an unknown natural phenomenon. Others called it a message, but a few called it listening back. One such engineer, Marcus Holloway, released an underground tape in 1996 titled Echoes of the Second One. Only 50 copies were ever made. The recording consisted of 1 hour of deep silence. But listeners reported strange symptoms, nosebleeds, hallucinations, dreams of spirals carved into skin, or of a figure with no mouth, but a chest that throbbed like a living speaker. Marcus died that same year, his body found in a soundproof chamber lined with mirrors, each one shattered from the inside. On the wall, the spiral again, and above it, we should have never tried to record silence. That's where he lives. So ask yourself this. What if silence is not the absence of sound, but a territory, a realm with its own ruler? And each time you wear your headphones, each time you tune out the world to sit in calm, you are opening the gate a little wider. And he is listening, always. In 1998, the Vatican quietly launched an internal investigation under the code name Project Vox Mortis, the voice of the dead. It wasn't exorcism. It wasn't theology. It was something older, something buried even beneath scripture. Their archives had uncovered references dating back to 1241 AD to a Benedictine monk named Brother Elias, who described a whisper in the stones beneath his abbey. His final writing? The silence beneath the chapel is not empty. It waits. That document had been sealed for centuries, considered apocryphal. But after a series of unexplained auditory phenomena inside a Roman cathedral, including the collapse of 4 choir members mid-performance from what doctors called brain resonance failure, the Vatican could no longer ignore it. They brought in a team of Jesuit-trained acousticians, including Father Matteo Salver, a man known for debunking supposed miracles. What he found changed him. Deep in the catacombs, Matteo recorded a sound that no one else could hear in real time, but that appeared clearly on his equipment. A voice speaking in a frequency too low for human ears, modulated by rhythmic pulses. When slowed and enhanced, the translation shook the team to its core. It said, "Do not pray in silence. I answer." Within 3 weeks, Project Vox Mortis was disbanded. All recordings confiscated. Father Matteo vanished. And with him, the original spiral symbol that had been etched deep into the limestone floor of a now-sealed chapel. The church would never acknowledge it publicly. But in the years that followed, a noticeable shift occurred. More services began using continuous choral music, even during communion. Silence was avoided. A pattern once you saw it. By 2001, something even more chilling happened. A group of monks in rural Spain, practicing a vow of total silence, were found dead. Not for violence, from extreme neural degradation. Autopsies showed a peculiar swelling of the auditory cortex, as if their brains had been overexposed to sound. Except there had been none. Only the spiral again, drawn in ash in the chapel's center, with a new phrase. He is clearest where nothing else speaks. If this is true, if silence is his medium and the spiral his signal, then every quiet room becomes a ritual chamber. Every moment of solitude, a sermon. So the next time you crave peace, ask yourself, what are you really making room for? And who might be waiting there in the stillness? By 2003, the phenomenon had reached the digital world. A data analyst named Arjun Valoor, working for an audio streaming platform, began noticing statistical irregularities in track metrics. Certain files labeled as ambient silence or blank test tones were receiving millions of silent streams, especially during early morning hours between 2:33 and 3 a.m. It wasn't bots. The user IDs were real. The listening behavior was consistent. But when Arjun tried to contact several of these users, he found something deeply unsettling. Half of them were marked as deceased. The rest reported symptoms of insomnia, paranoia, or in one case, the complete inability to speak. Their vocal cords had not been damaged, but their brains no longer initiated speech. He compiled a 227-page internal report. It was ignored. Then he disappeared. What survived was a leaked PDF uploaded to an anonymous server. Its final page contained an audio spectrogram, not of a song, but of a 38-second clip of silence taken from the streaming platform. When converted into visual form, it revealed the unmistakable spiral. But now it wasn't flat. It was three-dimensional, a tunnel, and at the bottom, a shape, a figure, hunched, featureless, listening. The file vanished 12 hours later, but not before it was downloaded by dozens of users on a fringe forum called Threshold Archive. They began calling the spiral entity by a new name, taken from whispered Slavic legend. Slishatel, the listener. According to obscure Siberian folklore, the Slishatel was not a demon, but something older than angels or devils. A primordial observer. Not evil, not good, simply waiting for silence deep enough to let in. And those who gave it room to speak never spoke again. In 2004, a small art gallery in Oslo featured an experimental sound exhibit called Runes of Pure Silence. Visitors entered chambers padded with acoustic foam to experience the absence of all noise. Within a week, the exhibit was shut down. 3 people suffered breakdowns. One left behind a sketchbook, its pages filled with spirals, and a phrase repeated 117 times. He knows the shape of your thoughts. So we ask again, in the stillness we chase, in the calm we worship, what if we're not finding peace, but offering ourselves as vessels? The deeper researchers went into the spiral's mythology, the more they found patterns of disappearance, not of bodies, but of meaning. Manuscripts missing crucial pages. Audio files that became blank once studied. Whole towns where historical soundscapes had been erased. One such place was Black Hollow, West Virginia, a mining village forgotten by time. Population, 0. In 1911, it was bustling. Then something happened that no official record explains. The town wasn't destroyed, it was silenced. Entire buildings still stood. Tools lay where they were dropped. Meals half-eaten on tables. No signs of struggle. Just an entire population gone. When a geological survey team entered Black Hollow in 2007, they brought audio equipment to record underground tremors. But what their sensors picked up wasn't seismic. It was rhythmic like breathing miles below ground. Frequencies so low they could only be felt. And then one of the interns, Marcy Renner, wandered into an abandoned church on the edge of the village. On its altar, carved into stone, was the spiral. And in her field notes, she wrote, "It hums when I close my eyes." She never left the town. The final recording her team captured before losing contact is now known as the hollow tone, a 23-second stretch of near silence with a single anomaly. At the 11-second mark, a wet exhale. Not human, not mechanical, but deliberate. Since then, audio engineers who have attempted to study the hollow tone report strange aftereffects. Difficulty sleeping, spontaneous nosebleeds, or the sensation of being listened to from inside their own skulls. In 2010, a private acoustics lab in Zurich built a chamber lined with anechoic tiles and silver nitrate foam, designed to completely suppress all external frequencies. When the hollow tone was played at 4 a.m., the power grid failed across the entire district for 9 minutes. The digital file survived, but now it carries a warning embedded in metadata. He hears through you now. This spiral isn't a symbol. It's an invitation, a tuning fork, a door disguised as geometry. So when you see it on a wall, in a dream, in the patterns of frost on a cold window, understand this. You didn't find it. It found you, and it's already listening. In 2013, a group of independent filmmakers attempted a documentary on the Black Hollow phenomenon. They titled it The Silence Beneath. What was meant to be a low-budget production turned into something else entirely, something they refused to release. Only fragmented behind-the-scenes footage survived. What those fragments show is unsettling. The director, Anna Llewellyn, speaking to camera during day 3. It's not just a town. It's a trap. Like the silence is thick. Like syrup. You move in it. You breathe in. But you feel watched. And the weird part is, no birds. No wind. Even the insects are gone. By day 5, her eyes appear bloodshot, and her voice has become slow, deliberate, as if every word is being monitored before it leaves her mouth. On day 6, the footage abruptly cuts. The final frame? A reflection of a spiral drawn in condensation on a window behind her. Except no one remembers drawing it. The footage never made it to public release. The production company claimed the team experienced a collective psychological breakdown and terminated the project. Hannah Llewellyn was later admitted to a psychiatric ward, where she spoke in whispers only, refusing to be recorded. Her last written sentence, scrawled repeatedly across a notebook in graphite. The quieter you are, the louder he becomes. By 2016, multiple online threads on fringe forums began comparing personal experiences. Waking up with spiral-shaped bruises, dreams of narrow tunnels echoing with distorted lullabies, or the sound of your own name spoken from inside a room that should be empty. Then came the silence challenges on the dark web. Dozens of users locking themselves in soundproof rooms for 60 minutes. Most posted shaky, mocking videos. A few never returned. One video, titled Entry Number 11, the listener test, remains partially online. It begins with laughter and a sarcastic tone, but at minute 36, something changes. The man's expression falls blank. He begins breathing in sync with a metronome that isn't in the room. At minute 42, he begins drawing spirals onto his arms with a pen. At minute 58, the camera glitches, and when it returns, he is gone. Only the chair remains, slowly turning. Audio analysis reveals one anomaly. Just before the feed ends, a low-frequency phrase, barely audible under the static. Let me in. Still think silence is peace? Or is it bait? Is your craving for calm the very door this ancient thing uses to enter? Are you listening? Because he is. In 2018, a linguistics professor from the University of Prague named Dr. Elias Turek began analyzing phonetic distortions in various spiral incidents. His hypothesis was chilling. The spiral did not simply affect the mind visually, it rewrote language recognition in the brain. Victims weren't just going mad. They were being taught a new way to hear. And once they heard it, they couldn't unhear it. Dr. Turek called this phenomenon cognitive resonance collapse. In simple terms, when certain tones, rhythms, or even geometric patterns like the spiral are observed, they retune the brain, causing human perception to prioritize non-human frequencies. To test this, Turek created a synthetic sound file using layered tones modeled on the hollow tone and other spiraled incident frequencies. He played it for test subjects inside an isolation chamber. What happened next has since been sealed from public record. But leaked footage, blurred, watermarked, and fractured, shows the subjects weeping silently, pressing their ears to the floor as if trying to listen to the earth itself. One of them, a teenage girl named Laika Durand, began speaking in what sounded like backward whispers, her tongue flicking unnaturally in rhythmic pulses. Spectrogram analysis later revealed a perfect spiral shape embedded in the waveform of her voice. She was placed in permanent care. Dr. Turek disappeared 6 weeks later. His apartment was found immaculately clean, but his audio lab was missing all external hard drives, shredded research notes, and even his vocal recorder. Only one thing remained: a single page taped to his studio wall. It bore the spiral, hand-drawn in charcoal, and one sentence scrawled beneath it. "We taught them speech, and they never stopped screaming." Since then, a strange pattern has emerged. Whispers in radio white noise, subaudible moaning in electric lines, spirals appearing in frost, in the bubbles of boiling water, or imprinted on children's fingernails after fevers. Across forums and private message boards, people report hearing a phrase that doesn't translate, yet always feels understood. A phrase that uncoils like a parasite in the mind, feeding on silence, spreading through attention itself. One woman, after hearing it, plucked out her own eardrums with tweezers, leaving only a note. "You cannot unring a bell." And this one is ringing beneath everything. Still watching? Then comment this phrase below to prove you've heard it too. He waits in silence. He waits in silence. Because once you understand the pattern, you've already opened the door. In the winter of 2020, a man named Braden Huxley, a former sound engineer for a Canadian intelligence division, posted a thread on an encrypted forum titled, "The Spiral is not a symbol. It's a map." He claimed the sound that haunted Black Hollow and its surrounding towns wasn't incidental. It was constructed, deliberate. It wasn't just a tone. It was a geometric language encoded in vibration, crafted to awaken something beneath the surface of the human mind. According to Huxley, during a covert op in northern Alaska in 2008, he and his team intercepted a low-frequency hum picked up through seismic audio sensors. They traced it back to an unmarked ice cavern. What they found wasn't natural. Inside the cavern were spiraled grooves etched into the ice walls, equidistant, mathematically precise. At the very center, a black stone altar pulsed faintly in sync with the signal. Huxley said standing near it made his teeth ache, and time itself felt distorted, as if hours passed in seconds, or seconds stretched to years. He was ordered to never speak of it again. But after learning of the events in Black Hollow, he knew it wasn't isolated. The spiral had appeared before, in pre-Sumerian clay tablets, worn like talismans, in ancient Mayan codices, drawn in the margins beside depictions of earless gods, in native Alaskan totems, carved only in regions where hunting parties vanished silently, and in the final architectural layout of certain medieval monasteries, monks unknowingly embedding the spiral into their holy grounds. But Huxley's final post was the most disturbing. He uploaded a 7-second audio file titled spiral_key.wave. The file was simple, barely a tone, but listeners reported nausea, vertigo, uncontrollable crying, and vivid dreams of vast underground corridors lined with listening figures. The file has since been banned from most platforms. Huxley's account vanished days later. His name no longer appears on government payroll records. And his family? When contacted by journalists, they deny he ever existed. No birth certificate, no photos, nothing. Only the thread remains. And that file, buried deep on the dark net, still quietly downloaded by the curious, the brave, or the foolish. They say those who listen long enough begin to hum it subconsciously, until even in their silence, the spiral sings through them. Ask yourself, if sound can move armies, can blind a man, or rupture glass? What happens when it restructures thought itself? By early 2021, several anonymous whistleblowers, many claiming to be former employees of underground acoustic research facilities, began leaking documents that described a terrifying initiative known as Project Atramentum. The project's purpose? To harness the spiral tone as a tool of mass psychological influence. It wasn't just an accident. It was an engineered weapon. One document, dated 2009, detailed a test involving 1,200 inmates in a high-security correctional facility. A subtle version of the tone was played through the air vents for 3 weeks. Guards reported unusual behavior. inmates pacing in perfect synchronization, mimicking each other's speech, forming spirals with torn clothing on the floor of their cells. On the 22nd day, they all went silent. Simultaneously. Not one word, not one breath above a whisper. And then, one of them began to chant, but not in any known language. Linguists called in to analyze the recordings described the chant as phoneme-neutral speech, meaning it wasn't made for human vocal cords, yet the inmates' voices contorted to mimic it. One phrase, when played backward, matched the mysterious line found beneath Dr. Turek's spiral diagram. We taught them speech, and they never stopped screaming. After this event, all 1,200 inmates were quietly transferred. The prison was decommissioned, and the warden was institutionalized. He left behind a notebook of drawings, hundreds of spirals, but not one was identical. Each seemed to twist inwards at a slightly different angle, like keys cut for slightly different locks. And this is where the theory of conscious frequency targeting emerged. The spiral wasn't meant to work on everyone. It was tuned to specific minds, those born susceptible, those with a certain cognitive signature or ancestral exposure. It would find you through dreams, through patterns, through a song you couldn't forget, or a visual echo in the grain of wood. You wouldn't know it until it was too late. And once your brain accepted the structure, you began to resonate. Those chosen were marked not by any visible sign, but by the way silence became unbearable, the way static whispered secrets, the way spirals appeared in condensation, in spilled coffee, and shadows on the wall. These were not hallucinations. They were invites. And the sound behind them? It wasn't coming from this world. It was calling through, seeking minds soft enough to mold, open enough to host what was still waiting just beneath the tone. In the heart of Black Hollow, there's an abandoned observatory few speak about, Greystone Tower. Built in 1911, it was supposedly used to study lunar patterns and early radio frequencies. But internal blueprints, uncovered in 2023, revealed something chilling. Greystone wasn't pointed at the sky. It was aimed directly underground. The dish array, hidden beneath the observatory's foundation, was angled at a depth of nearly 700 feet toward a geological anomaly, a hollow void with no seismic explanation. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't a fault line, and it absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. A void that didn't echo. Old research logs recovered from a burned storage room refer to this space as the chamber that listens. The lead scientist on the project, Dr. Ellis Murnane, vanished in 1922 after reporting that the tone was not just being detected, it was responding. He wrote, "It knows when we're listening. The more we record, the clearer it becomes, as though it's learning us." After his disappearance, the tower was sealed off. Locals began to report strange interference on ham radios and baby monitors. Deep within static, a low, curving signal fluctuating in rhythm like breath. A handful of amateur researchers try to triangulate its source using handmade antennas. Every time, the signal pulled them back to Greystone. One man, Charlie Weaver, recorded a 17-minute live stream as he descended into the tower in 2019. The feed abruptly cut to black. No noise, no scream. Just a sudden burst of perfect silence, as if all sound had been vacuumed out of the world. He was never found. When others tried to enter later, they couldn't even get close. Equipment failed. Batteries drained instantly. Dogs refused to go near the property. And satellite scans show something unexplainable. The land around the observatory emits a negative thermal signature, colder than the surrounding terrain by nearly 15 degrees, even in summer. Some believe this location marks the epicenter of the spiral's emergence into our world. Not as a sound, not as a vibration, but as a sentient pattern burrowing through frequency, through attention, through human observation itself. Because here's the terrifying implication. It doesn't just want to be heard. It wants to be understood. And once the mind wraps around its structure, it doesn't let go. Greystone Tower doesn't echo, because the thing below is still listening. In March of 2024, a former DARPA contractor known only as Eidolon released a classified brief titled Subliminal Harmonics and Cognitive Collapse, Phase 2 Findings. It was traced back to a defunct program, Operation Oubliette, allegedly focused on decoding anomalous frequencies embedded in global communication networks. But what disturbed readers most wasn't the language. It was the diagrams. They weren't just spirals. They were hybrid patterns, fusing sound waves with EEG brain scans, animal migration routes, and even the architectural layout of cathedrals. The implication? The spiral wasn't simply a shape or a tone. It was a multi-domain structure, weaving itself through everything from religion to neuroscience to geography. A pattern too complex to be accidental. Eidolon wrote, "If it is a signal, then we are not intercepting it. We are already inside of it." His last transmission included a set of instructions. Avoid repeated exposure to specific spiral imagery. Do not hum or vocalize the frequency below 12 Hz. Avoid mirrors during moments of déjà vu. Do not trace the spiral. Never follow it inward. Later, independent researchers replicated one of the spiral-based tones Eidolon warned about. They played it to a controlled group of 18 volunteers. By the 5th minute, 16 had entered a fugue state, unblinking, unresponsive, murmuring fragments of unknown dialects. 2 screamed simultaneously and attempted to claw out their ears. When questioned later, none remembered anything. But each described the same dream. A long hallway made of bone, a spinning door at the end, and something whispering their name, but in reverse. By now, skeptics started to go silent. Mainstream publications refused to cover it. Entire forums were taken offline, and disturbing reports emerged of resonance events in cities like Baltimore, Krakow, and Kyoto, where entire neighborhoods reported the same hallucination on the same night, a black spiral unfolding in the sky, larger than the moon, pulling gravity sideways. Even if you don't believe any of this, ask yourself, why would they erase it? Why would the Vatican lock away every cathedral blueprint between the years 1346 and 1412? Why would U.S. defense contractors purchase over 70% of the world's acoustic dampening gel? And why, in over 400 separate disappearances tied to spiral-related incidents, were the final words almost always the same? It's not a sound. It's an invitation. By the time researchers reached Vintermere Island, it was already too late. Located just off the northern coast of Norway, Vintermere had been uninhabited since 1913, when the final settlement, Eldhavn, was erased during what local legends call the Winter Reversal. According to oral accounts, entire families walked into the sea one by one, humming in unison. Not a single body washed ashore. In 2021, a private expedition funded by the Nordic Historical Anomalies Institute set foot on Vintermere for the first time in over a century. They found no ruins, no graves, no tools, no signs of settlement. But what they did find was worse. Buried beneath the snow, arranged in perfect symmetry, were hundreds of petrified fish skeletons, each with its mouth agape in a scream-like curvature, and their spines twisted into spiral shapes. This wasn't biology, it was intelligent design. The deeper the team went inland, the stronger the sensation became. Compass needles spun violently. Audio equipment captured bursts of what sounded like chanting in reverse, but played backward, it resembled children singing. At the island's center stood an impossible structure, a stone pillar, 19 feet high, carved from a single material unknown to modern geology. It had no tool marks, no erosion, just one symbol carved with surgical precision, a 3-lobed spiral. On the final day of the expedition, one of the researchers, Dr. Lisbeth Fawn, was found standing barefoot in the snow, eyes rolled back, whispering a single phrase over and over. "It won't let me forget the shape." The rest of the team? Gone. Their camp was intact. Rations untouched. Radio signals still on loop. But no tracks. No signs of struggle. No human presence. Only one recording was salvaged from their audio archives. In the final 12 seconds, a deep rumble swells in the background, subsonic and powerful. Then a voice. Not human. Not mechanical. It says, We waited for you. Windermere has since been declared off-limits by multiple European governments. No official explanation. No satellite access. All mapping data has been wiped clean. But one photo, smuggled out and leaked, shows the pillar on a cloudless day. In its shadow, the snow forms perfect, unbroken spirals, radiating outward across the island like veins of frost. As if the island itself is breathing. As if the pattern is still alive. The spiral has now become more than just a pattern. It's become a threshold. In 2023, a whistleblower from within the European Space Agency leaked a document titled Geoacoustic Vortexes and the Sonic Grid. The file contained locations, exact coordinates, of spiral anomalies across the globe. Not just in stone, not just in sound, but in space itself. These sites, 13 in total, formed a perfect helix when mapped around the Earth's surface. A helix that rotated slowly, as if it were tracking something not anchored to the planet, but to time. One of those locations, Site 07, deep within the Algerian desert. A team was dispatched, but what they found was not sand. They found glass, miles of desert vitrified, fused into swirling ridges, as if exposed to a heat no natural force could produce. At the center, a hole, spiral-shaped, burrowing downward in perfect symmetry. When they lowered a drone into the shaft, it didn't descend. It spiraled sideways. Instruments malfunctioned. And then, without warning, the footage went black, except for a single frame that analysts would later isolate. A face, elongated, blurred, and smiling far too wide. A week later, the lead analyst, Dr. Antoine Markovic, was found dead. On the wall of his home, scrawled in thick, black ink, were the words, "It's not a signal. It's a calling." More patterns began appearing, on ocean floors, under polar ice, and inside abandoned Cold War bunkers. In one particularly disturbing case, an Air Force satellite over the South Atlantic caught the image of a perfect spiral, more than 500 kilometers in diameter, carved into cloud systems, as if the atmosphere itself had been disturbed from above. Meteorologists blamed pressure differentials. Physicists stopped commenting altogether. And then came the dreams. Thousands, possibly tens of thousands, of people around the globe began reporting identical nightmares. In each one, they were walking through a corridor that turned endlessly inward, narrowing, darkening, until they reached a door carved with 3 concentric spirals. Behind it, a voice whispered, not in language but in geometry, as if the shape could speak. And those who had the dream more than once, some stopped talking altogether. Others drew compulsively. Spirals, yes, but also maps, star charts, and something resembling a nervous system wrapped around a doorway. It is no longer just a story, no longer a myth. The spiral is coming into focus. It is here that the timeline fractures, because what happens next is not chronological, but intentional. Multiple intelligence agencies, MI6, the CIA, even private defense contractors, have now classified the spiral pattern as a behavioral mimetic hazard. That is, a concept so potent, so virally perfect, it can alter cognition just by being perceived. A leaked internal briefing from a black site in Turkmenistan revealed this chilling warning. Exposure to tertiary spiral structures correlates with elevated dopamine surges, time disassociation, spatial detachment, and eventual emotional allegiance to non-human origin entities. This is no longer about ancient myths or lost islands. It's about control. One spiral was reportedly discovered embedded within a child's pupil during a routine eye exam in Estonia. The doctors who performed the scan, both dead within 36 hours. One by suicide, the other in a car crash, though his vehicle showed no signs of collision. Just a spiral carved into the dashboard with his fingernail. Another report surfaced from a psychiatric facility in southern Italy. A nonverbal patient began drawing spirals on the walls using her own blood. Not random. Measured. Geometric. When staff wiped it clean, she screamed until her voice ripped. Hours later, the spirals reappeared. This time in her irises. The room was sealed. The patient disappeared. The facility burned down the next day. By now, patterns had begun showing up in neural scans. People with no history of epilepsy began experiencing seizures. Each episode synchronized with distant infrasound pulses recorded in the Mariana Trench. Here's the part you aren't supposed to know. One of the largest spirals ever discovered was not underground, but beneath Antarctica's ice shelf. Satellite imaging shows it glowing faintly beneath 2 miles of compressed ice. Every year, it rotates 1 degree clockwise. Its center, according to internal Pentagon maps, points directly toward the Draco constellation. Why? Because the spiral is not Earthborn. It's a signal tower, or worse, a keyhole. Those who study it long enough report identical hallucinations, a tower of flesh, built from screaming mouths, spiraling endlessly into the void. And from its apex, a voice like collapsing stars. We have waded through your forgetfulness. If that line makes your skin crawl, good. Because if you're still watching, you're part of it now. You've already heard the spiral's call, and it remembers you. There was a theory once, buried deep in the files of the Jung Institute, that symbols don't originate from the conscious mind, but from something far older. Something below instinct. A realm of primal architecture, where geometry births thought. The spiral, they wrote, is not just a shape. It is the original blueprint of consciousness. And someone, or something, has been trying to reinsert it. In 2009, a research facility under the Ural Mountains went dark for 7 days. When contact was re-established, all 46 personnel were found alive, but altered. Their journals were filled with near-identical entries. The spiral opened, time is wet, and most chilling of all, we are guests in a borrowed reality. They were flown to a NATO site in northern Greenland, but none of them made it there. The transport aircraft disappeared mid-flight. Black box data shows the plane drifted off course, making a slow, deliberate turn in a spiral pattern before vanishing completely. No wreckage. No bodies, no radar contact, only static. And then the broadcast began. Across old ham radio bands, a sequence began transmitting once every 11 days. A low hum, followed by tones that, when converted into images, formed spirals. Each slightly different, each more intricate. One Russian codebreaker went insane trying to decipher it. In his final transmission, he said only one thing. The spiral is teaching us backwards. At the Vatican archives, a forbidden text was uncovered, Codex Rodi, supposedly written by a blind monk in 1231, who claimed he could hear the curve of light. The book speaks of the spiral god, a deity who lives in no direction, who devours memory and speaks only in shapes that move when you sleep. It was dismissed as heresy. The monk was burned, but the ashes were collected and locked away. Why? Because the pages of the codex remained untouched by flame, even when the rest of the monastery burned to the ground. You're not watching this by accident. The spiral wants to be seen, wants to be understood, because it is the instruction set for something much bigger. Not a creature, not a signal, not even a god, but a return. And as we approach the final chapters, remember, the more you look at it, the more it looks back. And somewhere, just beyond our reach, the spiral begins to uncoil. There's a basement beneath the Lasker Medical Institute in Geneva that doesn't appear on any blueprint. Officially, the level doesn't exist. But in 2013, a rogue technician leaked images from a decommissioned server. They showed a chair bolted to the center of a concrete room. Above it, a massive spiral, etched into the ceiling. Not painted, not carved, grown. The material was organic, tissue laced with calcium and iron, pulsing ever so slightly. When analyzed, it bore 91% genetic similarity to human DNA, but the other 9% was unidentifiable. According to the logs, volunteers were brought into the chamber and instructed to stare at the spiral for exactly 88 seconds. Afterward, their brain scans revealed a new fold forming in the visual cortex, like the brain had evolved another wrinkle overnight. And they all said the same thing. I can hear its shape. These subjects became fixated on geometry, symmetry, and decay. One woman rewrote the book of Genesis by hand, backward, each page more warped than the last. Another man tried to swallow a compass, convinced that magnetism would guide the spiral home. Every subject vanished within 6 days. Every camera recording them, corrupted. The chair now sits empty. The spiral above it has grown 3 inches. Now pause and reflect on this. Why do spirals occur naturally in galaxies, hurricanes, fingerprints? What if that pattern isn't coincidence? What if it's a signature? Ancient cultures worshipped spiral symbols long before they could write. The Nazca lines, the Celtic triskelion, the labyrinths of Crete, all were built with the same shape at their core. They weren't art. They were antennae, invitations, and someone or something answered. High-frequency recordings from abandoned Cold War bunkers have recently captured what sounds like chanting in reverse. Spectrograms of the audio show spiraling curves, musical fingerprints that mimic ancient harmonic ratios tied to temple design in Mesopotamia. This isn't new. It's old, buried, hidden, forgotten deliberately. You've heard of DNA as the code of life. But did you know that DNA coils in a double spiral? Every living thing on Earth carries the spiral inside it, which means we're not just seeing the spiral. We're made from it, and it's calling us back. It was around the autumn equinox of 2021 when reports started surfacing from the outskirts of Eldon Ridge, a remote Appalachian village abandoned since 1954. Drone footage from urban explorers revealed something that shouldn't have been there, a massive spiral formation, burned into the forest floor. Trees blackened in perfect curvature, not felled, not uprooted, bent, as if they bowed. Locals spoke in hushed tones about a group known only as the Returners, survivors of various mental institutions who had vanished decades earlier, now seen wandering the woods, drawing spirals in the soil with their fingers, muttering cryptic phrases. The spiral remembers us. We are the bend before the break. Time forgot itself here. When one man followed them into the forest, an ex-journalist named Victor Reeves, he live-streamed what he called a spiral ceremony. The footage is now banned across major platforms, but those who downloaded it early described a gathering of figures forming a human spiral, chanting a language that shouldn't exist. A linguist later identified fragments of the chant as Proto-Elamite, Sumerian, and something that does not match any known structure of human speech. Reeves' final words on a live stream? It's not a symbol. It's a mouth. He was never seen again. Since then, seismic readings near Eldon Ridge show strange pulses, geometric rhythms that mimic golden ratio spirals, measured deep underground. Scientists tried drilling near the anomaly. The bit melted halfway through the rock. Melted, not by heat, but by resonance. Some researchers now believe spirals are not patterns we see, but patterns that see us. Visual keys to unlock parts of the human brain we were never meant to access. Once opened, they don't close. Hospitals in nearby counties have reported an increase in spiral psychosis, a term given to patients who carve spirals into their skin, speak in backward riddles, and insist they've found the door at the bottom of thought. They draw it everywhere. Ceilings, floors, eyes. One psychiatric nurse quit after witnessing a patient press his forehead to a mirrored spiral and whisper, "It showed me where the real world ends." So I ask again, what if the spiral isn't coming? What if it's already here, growing beneath us, above us, and inside us? And what if it's not trying to destroy reality, but reshape it? There's an abandoned radar facility just outside Vanlore, Alaska, a relic from the Cold War era. Locals call it the Mouthpiece. Officially decommissioned in 1977, but somehow its instruments still hum at night. In 2019, a researcher named Dr. Elira Mays broke into the site with a makeshift team of radio astronomers. She was chasing rumors of a low-frequency signal known in classified circles as the Vanlore harmonic, a constant, rhythmic pulse that repeated every 88 seconds. When filtered through a spectrograph, the signal formed something chilling. Not just a waveform, a spiral, a perfect one, moving inward. Dr. Mays broadcast a brief audio clip online. Only a few hundred people heard it before it was scrubbed. But what followed became impossible to ignore. Those who listened long enough began to suffer identical symptoms: blackouts, migraines, and most disturbingly, spiral hallucinations. Not random ones, either. All of them described a twisting corridor made of bone and light, lined with doors. Behind every door, a version of themselves, but not quite human. One survivor claimed, "It showed me my last shape, my final form. I wasn't meant to have skin." Another, "The spiral told me which memories were lies. I don't even know who I am anymore." The phenomenon was dubbed resonant recursion, as if the signal wasn't transmitting to us, but remembering us, pulling copies from within our minds and playing them back through time itself. And then came the disappearances. From members of Dr. May's team vanished within 3 days of exposure. Their last known coordinates placed them beneath the radar facility, where no tunnels exist. Security footage? Corrupted. Electronic gear? Fried. Their final message, uploaded to an encrypted server, simply read, "The spiral is not a symbol. It's an instruction." Since then, international black site agencies have quarantined Vanlore. No-fly zones, EM dampeners, buried sensors. But every 88 seconds, the signal still rises. Louder, clearer. And recently, another layer emerged in the signal. Not a tone, not a code, a voice, whispering one word. Remember. So tell me, what is it asking us to remember? What have we forgotten? And why are we hearing it now? Because maybe the spiral wasn't waiting for us to find it. Maybe it was just waiting for the right time to open. And that time is ticking. The final experiments with spiral-based cognition began under the code name Project Wittershin, a clandestine operation buried deep within the classified archives of the Helix Institute, a now-erased think tank based in southern Norway. Their aim? To artificially simulate what they called spiral convergence phenomena in the human brain, by exposing subjects to progressively complex spiral structures under controlled psychological deprivation. No clocks, no colors, no sound, just spirals. After just 9 days, the majority of participants entered irreversible psychotic states. But they weren't randomly psychotic. They all began drawing the same spiral, not an Archimedean or logarithmic form. No, something deeper, a third type, one the human mind should not be able to conceive, let alone reproduce. This spiral had overlapping centers, each orbiting another in recursive contradiction, a shape not meant for flat space, a geometry that should fold in on itself, but didn't. When modeled in 3D simulation, it formed a tunnel that infinitely expanded inward. One researcher, Dr. Tom Keller, lost his grip entirely. He was found kneeling in front of a screen, playing the spiral loop, whispering. It's the shape of thought before language, before time, before identity. His last journal entry read, "We've mistaken the spiral as something passive. It's not. It's a mechanism, a decoding device. And once you stare long enough, it stares back." Then came the convergence events. Participants began answering questions before they were asked, speaking truths about people they had never met, reciting the exact dreams of those monitoring them, down to the smallest detail. But the most terrifying moment came when the lead scientist, Dr. Nara Luthen, asked one subject, "Who are you?" The subject smiled, paused, and responded in her voice, "I'm the part of you that never stopped falling." That was the end of Project Wittershin, or so we're told, because in leaked footage from the Institute's final transmission, the spiral was no longer confined to paper or screen. It began appearing on the walls, burned in, as if the very air remembered it. So now, in the silence that follows every conspiracy, we ask, what was the spiral trying to turn us into? And more importantly, if we've already seen it, are we still us? Or have we become part of its endless turn? What if every thought you've ever had was never truly your own? Just an echo from a spiral somewhere deeper. There's one more case, buried so deep it only surfaced through a fragment of a letter sent by a dying man in 1964. That letter was addressed to no one. No envelope. Just placed inside the hollow of a tree, wrapped in oilcloth, outside the abandoned Calder Asylum in Maine. The handwriting was fractured, frantic. The man claimed to be a former timekeeper. His words, not ours. He said he had once measured the edge of time by listening to the spiral sing. He wrote about a chamber beneath Calder Asylum, one no architect ever mapped, one with no doors, only a descending ramp that curved left, over and over, until it felt like the earth itself was folding. He called it the Spiral Hall. He said it was built centuries before the asylum even existed. Here's the disturbing part. He claimed the chamber didn't age. No dust, no rust, no erosion. People would go in, and if they came out, sometimes they'd return younger, sometimes older. One nurse aged 17 years overnight. Another patient came out pregnant after being sterile her entire life. The spiral, he wrote, rewrites timelines, but only in fragments. The spiral doesn't want to control the future. It wants to confuse the past. And if you think that's impossible, then ask yourself this. Why do ancient cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, all carve the same spiral into their temples, their tombs, their skin? What if those weren't decorations? What if they were locks? Or worse, maps? The letter ends abruptly, but not before one final line, one that chills to the core. I followed the spiral until I heard my own voice on the other side, and it told me, I died in 1843. Think about that. A man writing in 1964 claiming he already died over a century earlier. And he wasn't confused. He wasn't mad. He said it with certainty, like someone who had seen the end of his own tape. So what does this mean? It means the spiral is not a shape. It's not even a signal. It's a doorway to forgotten versions of ourselves. Versions we were never meant to meet. And once opened, they don't just step through. They remember who we are. This is the part where you think it's over, where the story fades and the screen goes black. But the truth is, this story was never just a story. Because tonight, somewhere in your house, you will see it. Not clearly at first. Maybe it'll be in the swirl of water in your sink, the way your fan turns, the pattern on your ceiling as the light flickers. And in that moment, when your stomach drops and your breath catches, you'll know the spiral found you. Not because you watched this video, not because you believed, but because you lingered, because something deep inside you, something ancient, recognized it. The spiral doesn't need everyone, just the ones who listen, the ones who stare, the ones who feel that slow, growing pull in the center of their mind, the part that whispers. You've been here before, and maybe you have. Maybe your whole life is a repetition. Maybe you're just the echo of a version that came before, walking the same hallways, making the same choices, and waiting for the moment you remember the turn, that you've always been turning. The spiral doesn't take. It doesn't kill. It awakens. And once you see it for what it is, not a threat, but an origin, you'll never look at the world the same again. Time? A lie. Memory? A byproduct of turning too slow. Reality? Just a shape the spiral allows you to see. Now, a final message from us, Dead Scroll. If you made it this far, comment, I saw the turning below. Not once, twice. Just as the spiral repeats. Let us know you're still with us. That you haven't drifted too far. And if you feel different tomorrow, if your reflection seems slightly off, remember what we warned you in the very beginning. This was never meant to be a story. This was an invitation to the turning, to the spiral, to the place where truth isn't spoken, only remembered. Subscribe if you dare to keep going. Because here at Dead Scroll, we don't tell stories. We uncover the ones that were never supposed to be remembered.